Welcome to The People I Know, a philosophical podcast with and about the diverse people I've met and love as an African American woman. Today's guest is Reverend James Michael Joyner from St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church.
Hi.
Hi. So good to see you.
So I'm James, James Michael Joyner, the Reverend James Michael Joyner, if you're fancy. And yeah, I'm an Episcopal priest. I've been a priest for about 7 years almost. It'll be 7 years in December. Before that, I was a preschool teacher. I've also been a singer and a songwriter and a dancer and a drag artist and yeah, I feel like I'm more of an artist at heart, but this is where I am right now. So, and you and I know each other through Mr. Devon Crosby.
Yes, we do. Our mutual friend.
Who were you at UNCW?
I was, yeah. That's where I did my undergrad.
I was at UC Greensboro. And
Yes.
Devon and Joy and Chris and a whole company.
A whole company.
Just like characters, honestly.
Yeah.
That needs to be an episode, honestly, but
oh man, yeah,
I'm because y'all knew. Guess Shannon. Did you know Shannon?
No.
Okay.
Wait, I remember the name. No, I met Shannon, but I wasn't in with him, her. I can't remember.
When did you start down there?
Yeah, so I started 2001, and so I remember. So every time I got to be in your company, I always thought of like you and Devon as like older brother types.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, I'm hanging out with like the older kids. And I could never really like keep up because you all had like your established relationship and like your likes. And there was all kinds of things that like I got introduced to because of y'all. But like I just had no idea about.
Oh, wow, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been. I think of you when I think back, I think of you as just being always there. But I guess it was really like because Devon and I dated for like 3 months when we first met. That was like, I mean, that was early in my life. That was, I mean, like I might have been 18 or 19.
Oh gosh.
Which would have been 2000. And then we, you know, it's like I think that's a classic story for some gay boys is like they start off trying to be lovers and realize that they're better off friends.
Just friends.
Brothers though, that's good though. That's how Devon feels like to me. He's like family to me. So
yeah. I saw a couple of years ago, for whatever reason, he ended up seeing my mother more in the calendar year than I got to see him. And I was just like, how does this happen? It's like, well, that's just what happens with family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to jump into some things, I was thinking about you and kind of, I was so excited, as I've stated several times, so excited to do this with you, that I shared the Medium article with a couple of friends. And one friend was saying that, I don't know what he was expecting, but had different expectations of, I guess, who you are. And that triggered something for me. And it got me thinking, okay, if somebody sees you in all of your glory, well, some of your glory right now, and they hear that you're a queer drag priest, these are different titles that you hold, they might need to know what are some non-negotiables about you to kind of so I thought of this in terms of like, that's really offensive to some people because they think that, I don't know, you allow certain things in your life that would contradict their understandings of what a priest is, of what a drag queen is, or something like that. But do you think are some non-negotiables for you as a priest, or just as a person, that still align with those titles?
Yeah, I have never thought about it that way. That's a great question. What are my non-negotiables? That's great. It's like, I mean, it's a non-negotiable for me that that everybody's made in the image of God, you know? I guess like as a priest, like that, like, or honestly, not even as a priest, like as a Christian, like part of my Christian practice. I think one of the core beliefs is that the image of God is something that we share, you know? Like it's something, it's like a, I mean, it's a it's a it's all of us together, but it's something that each of us possess, and that comes through in different people in different ways. And I really believe in like a force that is just healing the whole world right now, and I think that comes out in different people in different ways. And so I guess like if I had a first non-negotiable, it would be respect for all the different ways that that healing presence comes out, you know, that healing, what I call God. What I think people in my corner of the Christian family call God is like the non-negotiable of like that's something that we're all a part of, you know. It's not something that like I or any of my people corner the market on. I think that's a common, you know, I start with that because I feel like my life when it's at its best is like usually on like the margin of like a couple different communities. Like I never really quite feel at home anywhere. And I think that's where I'm supposed to be. You know, that's actually a vibrant place for me. And so I have people in my queer community or my trans community or my drag community who see the kind of church part. And one of the first things that most people associate with it is like a kind of being right. Oh, here's a Christian. Here's somebody who, you know, goes about the world knowing that they have the right answer to everything and putting that on other people. I think that's a very reasonable impression of the religion in general to have, based on the dispositions that the loudest segment of our people have carried out. But that's one answer to your question. That's negotiable. Everybody's made in the image of God, and everybody has a way of showing that light, you know.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that's something, you know, especially now today in this era, in this time of existing, when we're in this country of existence, when we see so much like division and what not, that non-similarity, it's helpful for people, particularly of faith-based backgrounds, to see and hear and know that this is the commonality. We're starting from similar places. No matter where we go from there, we're still starting from this similar place. And it helps some folks to really be more open to understanding how those other places can happen. Yeah. So thank you. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh,
as far as non-negotiables go.
Yeah, it's like, is it a list or is it a one?
I mean, that's a really good one to start with, and I'm okay with it. But if there's anything else to add, just somebody knows.
There must be a bowl of red M&Ms in my office before I am able to meet with another person. No, non-negotiable. You know, I just think you know, like consent, I think applies like to, I mean, like I think we talk right now culturally a lot about consent in our personal relationships, but I think it just like applies to like community and to how we relate to, you know, our communities and like in our spiritual communities and like and who we are practicing that, or who we're putting that on or projecting that on, you know. There's a lot of you know, projecting oh, this is what I think is the best thing, and so I'm going to put that on you, but like this other person never asked for that. That feels like a consent issue to me. And, you know,
Yeah.
I think there are all kinds of like insidious ways that we wrote people into things that they never asked for, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
just much is in the water that you don't even notice it sometimes. So I try to look out for that.
Okay. That's getting my gears turning, regarding kind of how this fits into one of the larger projects I'm working on, which essentially is trying to get people to think critically, to think more critically. But I'm offering this series of videos and podcasts, as well as another series of videos for free. One, because I don't feel like dealing with licensing issues, but also like it's something, the teacher in me, I want to. I feel like that this should be just that this should be optional. If this is going to speak to you and help you to learn, help somebody to learn something critical, great. And if it doesn't work for them, okay, then they can move on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, I agree that the level of consent, even though we're speaking more about it now, we don't necessarily apply it to other things, especially intellectually or just cognitively. The things that we sign on to or don't get to. Um,
Hearing you say it like that, it helps me understand what I really mean, especially is that like if you are a teacher or you do come from a particular practice or tradition, like another person has to choose that for themselves,
mm,
like even if that practice is like therapy, it's like somebody in therapy has got to, or if somebody's heading into some kind of like recovery, it's like they have got to choose that for themselves if it's going to work, you know like, and to
yeah,
me that's what consent is. It's just like this is something that the individual is taking on and saying yes to, because if you don't own it, if you're not choosing it for yourself, it doesn't stick. Like
yeah,
it doesn't do good.
no. And can I just say that took me a long time to understand? It's
Yeah,
such a
yeah.
simple concept,
Mhm.
that God only helps those who help themselves. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really nice and dandy, but I mean, it might not have been 5 years ago until that really clicked. I
Mhm.
mean, and all kinds of doors have opened for me, like physically, mentally, spiritually. But wow, that's powerful stuff.
I think it's even more, I would say, if the aphorism is God only helps those who helps themselves, I think it's like God helps those who say yes. I can't, because I can't help myself sometimes.
Mm.
I need somebody else to help me.
Yeah.
Like, but I do have to say yes to it, whatever it
Yes.
is. I have
Yes.
to, I have to let it work in my life if it's gonna work. And
Yeah.
that's a consent thing. That's a saying yes thing. Yes,
Yeah.
or it's not time yet for this, or I want something else.
Yeah. Which I think, yeah, actually I'm going to skip over my next question because this does slide right into kind of the what role or roles do you think that critical thinking plays in religion or church or with faith?
Mm,
Because something, what you're just touching on, that I taught community college for 5 years or over five
mm,
years, philosophy, critical thinking, and ethics. In the ethics class, eventually we had to get to a point where everybody understood that we could agree with or acknowledge the different ethical theories without taking them in and accepting them.
mm,
And for some folks, that was on the first day. And for some folks, that was like right before the final exam. But we all had to get to that point. And that surprise just blew my mind as an instructor,
mm,
that, that level of critical thinking wasn't there. It's like, of course, you get to choose what you're going to,
mhm.
I don't know. So how do you find, what roles do you think critical thinking plays?
Yeah, and that's a good example. That's a great example to start with from your class, because the question of can you accept the fact that these ethical frameworks are different for other people? That's basically what you said, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I think what I've seen from my perspective as somebody who is working inside of a religious institutional structure is that the institutional structure is there to do that work. And I don't mean always in, sometimes we think about that in negative terms, like, oh, you're a sheep, like you got to think for yourself. Like, yes, like, so like, yes, there are institutional structures that like put things in us, that might be better off questioned. And there's also like some heavy lifting that sometimes like structures like that do, like I can't walk around outside. Well, actually I do. I'm somebody who walks around outside like questioning everything all the time,
Yeah.
like every day of my life, I'm like, does any of this mean anything at all? Right.
Yep. Yep.
I wouldn't say that's like the healthiest place. I've stopped fighting it. If some of that could be taken off my shoulders and
Hmm.
done by another person, I would certainly, I think, probably find time for other things to occupy my mind.
Absolutely.
So it's not always a bad thing, having these communities or institutions that help us with that work, that meaning making. Like, here's an ethical structure, here's a way of looking at the world, here's a way of defining what's good, and here are
Hmm.
people who agree and can help with that and build that up.
Hmm.
But a byproduct of that can be, if you are instructed and you're so insular that you think, oh, that's the only way, you know that's the only way. And convincing people that your way is the only way is a way of gaining institutional power,
Mm.
and using that kind of power. So
Hmm.
so what I think the role of critical thinking is in a religious context, or in a community religious context, is to get people to, I think it's liberating to help people see the structure that they might not have questioned, to see like, oh, this is my underlying ethical structure. This
Mm.
is what I believe about what is good in the world, what I trust, what I'm choosing to trust in the world, or what I trust implicitly. That if you start examining that and seeing, how it is for us personally, how it changes in our own lives personally, how it
Mm.
evolves with us, is part of an appreciation for how it's different in other people,
Hmm.
which to me is amazing. I just think you said that focusing on like all starting from the same place, and I add to that, like, sometimes I feel like it's all going to the same place too,
Mm.
or maybe not all going to the same place, but it's all part of the same. It's all part of what I see as the same movement in the world. A movement towards less self obsession, more trust in what's taking care of us, and a greater ability to, you know, take on what other people are carrying and be generous with what we have.
Mm.
Um, the better you can see how other people are doing that, then the better you can partner with other communities who are doing that kind of work too.
Hmm. I hope this isn't redundant, but I want to ask explicitly, do you think faith and critical thinking are compatible?
Oh yeah. Yes. They're compatible. They go great together. I think I highly recommend.
Put that on a shirt.
Well, and for me, again, from my Christian perspective, that's who Jesus is. Like,
Mm.
Jesus comes in, literally flips the tables over in the temple. Um, Jesus, all of the stories that Jesus tells are stories that promote critical thinking in a
Mm.
context of faith. You know, like, Jesus comes in and he uses the language that people are using about their faith, their experience, their values, their ethics. He's using the language and the vocabulary that's familiar to them. He's building on that, but he always twists it around, like, we Jesus told a lot of parables, and a parable it's not an allegory. It's not something where this means that and this means that. It's a story that's meant to kind of make you look at the world in a new way, and
Mm.
that's meant to make you question the way you've been doing things. And so I see that as like fundamental critical thinking, like a fundamental part of faith. I think it's a difficult part of faith because it's easier to be comfortable in that kind of like like I said, if I'm not questioning my sense of meaning, and I'm not saying people need to question it every day, but it's easier to just kind of sink into taking that for granted. So
Yeah.
so there's a resistance to critical thinking, but I think that critical thinking is actually at the heart of what good faith is about.
Hmm. Huh. I, I I I agree with you. I just want to state that even though it's interesting. My parents, they were raised in the churches, and then when it came to my brother and I, we only went to church for funerals and the occasional wedding, I guess. And so it's like I've always had this very tangential or just cursory understanding of religion, but being spiritual and understanding that there are things greater than us has never been, I've never doubted that. And then, over the last 5, 10, 15 years, especially, my faith has been tested. My faith has been strengthened. It's something that, I can't go a day without being thankful to something for my existence. And I have to be critical of that, because I can, especially now, having a better vocabulary when it comes to like Buddhism, or when it comes to like yoga and those kinds of philosophies, where it's like, oh, that's just my ego getting in my way. Like I have to be very active mentally, to get a lot of this conditioning out of the way, or just sort through it and see what is actually going on, kind of what's the bigger picture.
Mhm.
um, yeah, but I see that a lot of folks, or just many folks, there are people who don't do that or don't have the tools to do that. um,
That's,
yeah.
if I may build on that,
Hmm.
um, I think that is like, that's what I see as, when you say don't have the tools to do that. I think that so it's like I started by saying, is that it's understandable the kind of the negative images that people have of just Christianity. And I don't know, I actually sometimes wonder if we'll ever recover from that.
Mm.
Um However, I think one of the losses, so especially out here, Portland, Oregon, Wild West, it's not a religious culture at all. I went to seminary in New York City, where it's like, especially the Episcopal Church in particular, is very like entrenched in the city, like it's
Mm.
the oldest buildings, it's the oldest property. It's like, it's still in the common language. But
Mm.
out here, it's really not at all. People are not religious out here. And I think if there's a loss in that, it is that sometimes, because we're so like in our kind of like post enlightenment state, where we value reason very highly, and sometimes don't really have the same language to talk about our intuition, uh,
Mm.
or which for me is really just, our reason is limited, our human reason, like what we can know, is limited, and we
Mhm.
have to rely on some body of knowledge that is beyond what we can know mentally. And that's just like, our body has its own knowledge. We walk outside with a certain trust, of what's going to be there, what our day is going to be like. And when it comes to really kind of developing that trust and paying attention to that trust over time, it's like you don't have to use a religious system to talk about that.
Mm.
But I think I see people kind of like struggling with like, how do I talk about that? Like if I'm going to talk about it, like if I'm going to talk about my astrology, do I still feel insecure kind of like talking about something that is a non-rational way of relating to the universe? It's like
Mhm.
you see that kind of like insecurity um, about our intuition and trust pop up all over
Yeah.
the place. So it's one of the
Yeah.
things that I do think like religion has traditionally helped soften a little bit.
Mm. Insecurity about our intuition. There's so so much to say about that.
Not everybody, some people are feeling it, you know, and like
Yeah.
have found a way.
Yeah.
But I encounter a lot of people who have a hard time trusting
Hmm.
themselves or the world. So,
Hmm. And I think that does move into the what I was skipping over, as far as what is your religious relationship or non-religious, just what is your relationship with philosophy?
mm,
Because I like how you were setting up reason and intuition, and it's very true. You know,
mm,
we're so reason based as modern societies, and yet there's other stuff going on. So
right, right. Yeah. And you know, and I was saying before when we were checking in before, it's like I don't like we had to have a background in philosophy, some kind of background in philosophy to take theology classes in seminary in my
mm.
training. But you know, the way my brain works, a lot of that's lost. Or
Was
I,
it
you
just like
know,
the basics, or do
my
you,
brain, yeah, I remember some of the basics, but my brain, you know, just has to go to Wikipedia these days to recall, and that's okay.
okay. Hmm.
But you know, so I think like my relationship to philosophy is it's like there's always been whatever. I mean, you know, we see these philosophical currents moving through time. You know, we've seen different ways of being human.
Mm.
Like I don't want to like, you know, beat up the Enlightenment too much because sometimes Christians really like beating up on the Enlightenment, but that's like a completely different, you know, if we look at a way of being in the world that values that kind of like, you know, reason and logic based, and then we look like, you know, 2000 years before at like what was happening in Greece, like at some other mythopoeic worldview, you know, something that like saw the world as a place that, you know, might be inhabited by um, those things that are beyond our understanding, spirits, powers,
Hmm.
demons, like whatever. Like, I mean, I think that's kind of part of the philosophical currents that ebb and flow. I don't feel like that was a coherent, complete answer.
Well, what I'm hearing, what I've heard is that there is a relationship specifically between religion. You see a relationship between religion and philosophy. You've had a relationship with philosophy, although you might have forgotten it like you would a very brief relationship. So
I
yeah,
don't know her.
there's something there.
No, yeah.
Um,
It's you know, it's like I recognize the fact that all theology, I mean, I think all theology is a it's a kind of philosophy.
mhm,
I think they're different. Um
mhm,
but there's a dialogue happening there, and I may not always be able to name like the roots of the dialogue, but I feel like I'm fairly cognizant of like those questions, at least at a deeper level, maybe.
yeah. I feel like after doing my master's, I had a conversation with a theologian, and I got a better understanding of what I was doing in my philosophical program, and like the relationship between theology and philosophy. Like it's so much more I learned in that one conversation than like in years of philosophy. And related to that, like it took me, I don't even know when I found it out, but I hadn't known for a very long time that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you know,
Mhm,
he
mhm,
studied philosophy as well. And so I think I learned that after my bachelor's, after undergrad. And I'm like, wait, why didn't anybody tell me this? Why don't we as philosophers, why didn't I pick this up in a philosophy course? Is because that it's truly a one-way street. Philosophers are very nose down in the
mhm,
books alone.
mhm,
With studies can be very, and then as an outsider, I feel like theology is just not that way. I mean,
mhm,
yes, if you're talking about faith, that it can be something that's very personal, but there is some externality that is necessary, a necessary part of your studies, until you're able to kind of like go on your own, and maybe, I mean, then unless you're going to become a monk or someone, like you still are like leading others. So it's still, there's this social, you have to know about philosophy and other things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think like two of the differences is like, you know, theology is very much about, it's very much about a relationship. I mean, it's very much about like, it's not only, it's, if philosophy is like asking kind of the big questions about like why, what is good, how should we live our life in relation to what is good, which is kind of like my kind of working definition of philosophy in one way.
Mm-hmm.
um like why, what is this, what is good, what should we be doing, how should we living our life. Theology is like, it's all those questions, but it's all those questions in relationship to this power that is bigger than our own, this power that's deeper than our own, whatever it is that connects all of us together. There's something that connects all of us together that is hard to kind of, well, I mean, some philosophers attempt to describe it, I'm sure, but religion attempts to describe it in terms of a personal relationship, or attempts to at least make it relational to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the other thing I see as different is like, it'd be cool if there were like schools of philosophy, like practical schools of philosophy, like, and I'm sure there probably are like versions of this, but like what I see happening in churches, or at least in the kind of churches that I work with, is that, the one of the aims of the community is to take the big questions and to figure out like what the practical implications are in life.
Mm.
I mean, like, I left seminary with certain really big ideas about what this world is about, what life is about, but the practice of being with people when they're dying,
Mm.
the practice of being with people when everything's falling apart, or when trauma happens, or after trauma happens, um, it really becomes this like, your ideas have to hit the ground,
Mm.
and you find, okay, this might have been a great idea I had when my nose was down in a book, but it is not fly at the hospital bed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important to me. I mean, it's important to me that, because I think for me, it's like the work is, how do I help this other person, identify and articulate what is good in their life, what they believe is good, what they are drawn towards, what's calling them, and translate that into like what they're going to embody in the world and what they're going to
Mm-hmm.
practice in the world. And so that kind of like practical piece that I think is just like, it's a very natural, like you can't have church life without having it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't have like this community of people come together who are all different kinds of people and not have that kind of like, it's like people live, people die, shit happens, and you got to talk about it in a way that matters to people. So it's like, that's one of the things that I feel like has been, a gift of like what I would call practical philosophy or practical
Mm.
theology in my life
Mm-hmm.
with people.
You started kind of responding to that by saying that you're not sure if there are these schools of philosophy. There should be these schools of philosophy, especially currently. And I can only speak to like my own academic experience in philosophy, and then my own experience with philosophy as an American. Because when I speak to especially people from like Latin America who have been philosophizing since they were children,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
it's this whole other kind of perspective, these completely different perspectives, um, on the world and on thinking and on all of this, and it's so beautiful. But I think that's kind of part of what I want this to be, is making this stuff practical. Because yeah, sure, it would be awesome if my name is referred to like Plato or something, when I'm long gone. Sure, give my family some money for that sake. But what I'm much more concerned with is that like my little cousins and nephews and nieces are able to see how this is helpful on a day-to-day basis, either for themselves or for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah.
And and there's room for, it's like there's room. I mean, it's not a top down kind of thing. Like we need the big ideas. We
Hmm.
need impractical ideas even, and like we need people who have, their heads down in a book or their heads in the clouds. We need visionaries, and we need people and we need geniuses. And the thing is like about whether or not any of us are going to be the next Plato. It's like, if it comes, it comes. It seems to me that in every generation and age, there are, the genius of the world moves in different people.
Mm,
And like what needs to come out comes out. What needs to be thought is thought. What needs to be said gets said. And
mm,
there are the people who are right there, who have the life circumstances and the training and the platform and, the tools to articulate these things to the world. And then you have the majority of the rest of us who, maybe we're listening to that or trying to be a part of that conversation, but we're also in conversation with people who, aren't paying attention to that or aren't thinking about that, but who still need it in their life in some capacity. So
mhm,
I think there's a nice flow back and forth between the practical application and the impractical, as it were, if that's the other
mhm.
that spectrum or not.
I'm gonna chew on that a little bit more uh, later. Um, when it comes to existential dilemmas, this is like the big question.
Wait, before you can I say
Yeah.
it before you ask it, I'm on our commission on ministry here in Oregon,
Uh-huh.
and that's the group of people. It's a group of people who help people who are seeking ordination and who are trying to
Mm,
become either priests or deacons. And so there's like a committee of 12 of us, and so these people get interviewed by us at like different points along their journey. And I've gained a reputation for my favorite question, that I always we have a list of questions, but I always grab this one and ask it, which is, with what theological or existential dilemma are you currently struggling? So
How are you gonna
I
just
didn't know this
throw
was on the
some?
list. I didn't know this was on your list, but I have not personally been asked it before. So
Ooh. Okay, well. So the way that I wrote it down here might have been a little bit different of how I
yeah,
wrote it down for you. Is when it comes to existential dilemmas, how do you address them? How do you address struggle and success? How do you address kind of these age-old existential questions? Of course, putting this in the context of today and this year is just, oh, yeah. Uh, um, so you can just, let me just say existential dilemmas. Go.
well, I think yeah, the most honest answer is that I just struggle a lot.
Mm,
It's that
okay.
it's that I have so many questions and I have so few answers, and I'm usually like, just like buffeted about this like sea of just wondering what the hell is going on. And then and so I guess the way it works in my life personally is it's like there are all these big questions, and somewhere in that big sea of questions, like the little broken piece of life raft floats by, of something that I remembered learning or remembered knowing. And so I'll grab onto that and hold on to that for a little while and see how it
Mm,
matches up to what's going on. And then, I'll probably get bored with it and like throw it away and start swimming in the questions again. But that's kind of metaphoric. I guess I mean to say that like, again, it's like I don't think my job is to give anybody the answers. I think it's to help people wrestle with the questions. Um,
okay.
that seems very kind of curt, but like when it comes to wrestling with big questions themselves, I guess I just most of the biggest ones never seem to be quite complete, you know?
The questions themselves are
Well,
just kind of incomplete
the
questions.
process, I guess the process of like struggling with them or answering them,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
you're asking me, ask me what you're asking me again, please.
How do you feel about existential dilemmas?
Yeah. I feel that I'm surrounded by them on all sides. and that um and that what I see in my tradition is like, and what I see in my life, because it's not just my tradition, I'm a part of a lot of different traditions in a way,
Mm.
is I see a lot of different people trying to grapple with the same questions, which
Mm.
are like, what is the point? Like what,
Mm.
like why? What is the point? What am I, what makes me a part of, what makes us a part of each other? Like what is
Mm.
happiness? Like what are we trying to get? What are we trying to grow? So I just, I think I'm just like never satisfied with any of the answers. I'm fascinated by the answers. Like I'm fascinated by how different people answer the big questions in their lives and how I've tried to answer them in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been cursed or blessed with a mind that just like doesn't rest easily. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to make a side note here because I meant to say it like 15 minutes ago that I think this is the reason that I've always that I've stayed Facebook friends with you. That sounds so weird. That's the
Oh,
reason that I've wanted to maintain a connection because there is something more. There's always been something more. That's a reason that I was so close with Devon, and then meeting anybody who was close with him, I understood that they must also feel like there is more. They get into more in some kind of way.
mhm.
Um, so that is just on the one hand. um, and I don't want to kind of put words in your mouth or anything, or do you, as someone who this is part of you, recognizing that just kind of being existential, being being thoughtful about life, that's just you, that's who you are, who you have been. Do you feel like in your lifetime, or do you think in your lifetime you've gone through any kind of waves where sometimes those answers are less confusing and make more sense,
Mm.
and there's less questioning, and then you kind of hit these other waves where no, none of these answers, I see other people answering and good for them, but I've just got questions? um, or has it just felt kind of the same for always?
I think the waves, when you say waves, what I think about is in my life, that there is this cycle of sometimes I feel more secure in the answers that I'm choosing for why I'm waking up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And some days I have lost touch with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that over time, so that feels like a process that repeats every, month or so, maybe. I think over time for me, it's like there are less answers. I think over time for me, I have less time where I feel like I'm resting on the thing that seems certain to me, you know?
Mm.
And I think it's because I think another big value of mine is this idea that whatever this thing is that I'm trying to talk about, which I call God, which we call God in my tradition, it's something that's ultimately beyond the capacity of human language to describe. Like like when I talk about God, I'm talking about what I think is real. Oh, Lacan. Do you like Lacan? Jacques
I,
Lacan? Jacques
I
Lacan,
am not
Lacan,
familiar with them.
Lacan.
Check Lacan.
So he's not a philosopher, he's a psychiatrist.
Okay, how do I spell it?
Jacques
Oh, Una.
J Jaqueus.
Mm-hmm.
Lacan.
Lacan. Okay.
I just thought of him because I think about like he has he has philosophies about the realm of the imaginary, the realm of the symbolic of language, and the realm of the real. So
Okay.
he was a post-Freudian. He was
Okay.
he did these like lectures after Freud in like, I don't know, the 50s, maybe 60s in France. And I think about him a lot, and I've probably read him more than anybody else lately in the past few years. But when he talks about, because he talks about what is real, he talks about the real, like this, which I think is what Buddhists are talking about when they're talking about seeing past like the illusion of like solid substances,
Right.
like gaining perspective that this identity that we construct is an
This was,
illusion,
yeah,
that like
temporary.
coffee
This
cup
was
is
just,
space. That's what I think Jacques Lacan, from a Western perspective and from a psychiatric perspective, is trying to describe when he talks about the realm of the real.
mm,
And what he says is, what he then talks about is the realm of the symbolic and the realm of the imaginary, like the images that we develop, that we put on that to just kind of help navigate the real, to help explain
mm,
the real. But ultimately, the real is beyond, what our words are trying to grasp at, or what these images or archetypes that we develop are trying to grasp at. So it's not, to me, being left with the ungraspable is not abysmal in a negative way.
mm.
Like it's abysmal in like the best way of like, oh, like there's the limit of my understanding. Okay, all right, here we are. Here we are at
Yeah.
the end today. I don't know what's out there, and I probably never will. Like it's coming face to face with that, the limit of our own knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think I'm kind of like, I have a fixation. I have a fixation on the limit of my own knowledge. So I
Mm.
probably spend more time there than most people.
Mm. It's interesting way to put that. Having a fixation on the limit of our own knowledge, which I think would be very helpful for some folks to one accept knowing what we don't know or that we don't know.
And I'll tell you, I have big, maybe we don't know energy in my life. And that comes into conflict with a lot of people who,
Come to
come
you
to
to
me
know.
for certainty,
Ooh,
or answers or structure. Not
yeah.
structure for me,
Ooh.
but I do feel like the process of learning to trust whatever this is we're in,
Mm-hmm.
is
And
is a part of being comfortable with that line of what we don't know and can't know.
that's what I was thinking, that I can't remember which tradition I pulled this from, if it's with some recent yoga studies, but there's peace to be found there, in uncertainty. There's peace to be found in knowing that we cannot know, or perhaps we shouldn't know, or that as mortals there's things that we can't discover, or as humans there's things that we can't access. Instead of stressing us out because we're trying so hard, we're like banging on a door trying to kick a wall that isn't going to go anywhere, we can just kind of settle into where we are and be at peace with that.
Mhm.
I guess for certain things that might be more aggravating than others, especially when I want to know if I'm going to be successful. I want to know what's on the other side of
Mhm.
all of this work.
I wanna know. Yeah,
but
right. Nice.
but
And I want to hold up, I feel like a lot of what I'm saying in our conversation right now, I feel like I'm kind of like I feel like because I'm talking to you, I'm imagining my intended audience and saying any of this as being somebody who's not very religious.
Mm-hmm.
But I can imagine if you have anybody in your life or anybody who's listening to this who is kind of like deeply Christian in maybe a way that does like is kind of like what I've been talking about, like the kind of Christian who looks at the tradition and looks at scripture and says, no, we do know, like this has given us an answer. What I say to that, because I encounter that a lot, is, look at the places where like Peter, like when he was, and I'm just gonna like talk Bible for a minute for the people who know Bible who might be listening. It's like when Peter is writing his letter to the churches, I mean, he was talking about the whole world is about to fall apart. He was talking about like the earth and the heavens are going to be consumed by fire, and everything that we know of the way things are, is not going to be anymore. And Paul talked about this a lot. Paul was like, the present form of this world is passing away. And so what that tells me is that the point of our faith, it isn't to give us like this, certain, like, this is it, like, you have the answer now. I think the point of it is to develop in us a disposition that is able to face what we don't know and what is passing away, to be, ready for something new coming into the world. That's my word of knowledge for anybody sitting at home who might be like, Pastor James, I'm pretty sure the Bible tells us everything we need to know. And I have to be like,
What I pulled from that is something really, really nice, really interesting and powerful: the development of a disposition. And because that's something that I try to impart, or what was imparted on me with yoga, is this development of a disposition of being comfortable with discomfort, physically. And then the mental stuff, of course, comes. And then I can translate that when I'm off the mat or not doing asanas. I can translate that disposition into other situations. Oh, I feel the stress coming up. How can I make myself be in this different state? How can I tackle this different state? And I mean, we don't, right now in December in Arizona, we don't have fire in the sky. But literally. But yeah, I mean, I think that's really powerful, because one of the first times I heard this was actually in an Incubus song, or song by Brandon Boyd. Things have always been ending. Things have always been bad. It's always been the end of the world. That's right. and that's another thing, that it's taken me this long. I mean, I'm only 37 now, so I've, God willing, got plenty of time to go. But it's taken me this long to really get a handle on that. It's no different than hundreds or thousands of years ago when we thought that the world was going to end. So how can we actually get ourselves, recomport ourselves, to just deal with it?
Oh yeah. And that's a big part of what I think religion seeks to do. And I think probably philosophy does also. It's like, we don't remember our beginning and we don't know our end. And so we,
just
full stop. I don't know who needs to hear this today. But we don't remember our beginning. We don't know our.
No, we don't. Okay.
And I think that, I think some parts of religion, try to fill the gap, rush in to fill the void by saying, this is exactly how we began, and this is exactly where we're headed. And I think religion, when it's good, helps people, sit in what is real now. Like, what is the present moment? Like, what's happening right now? Like, we don't know. We've always been at the end. This is it. Like what we have right now, this is it. Like, we don't know what is like coming in the next moment, in the next day. We are at the end of the world. rather than spiraling out about what we don't know, we can, like you said before, make peace with what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The less time we spend in these fantasies that we're creating, develop some sense of security, some sense of false knowledge about like what I think is going to happen next, the more
Mm-hmm.
time we can rest and just like the way things are, like the way it really is in this moment, and not not try to build up anxiety or whatever it is for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. There's something in that. I've written some notes and going to return to these things, some of these things later. The final question that I have for you, that I have written down, are on the efforts of building and sustaining community. When we spoke the other day, you touched on how now that you're not able to do things in person
Mm-hmm.
for your job, to make this this is the case with many of us, you realized how important that in-person work is, how important your work is to do in person, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So how, if you could just speak to your efforts in the last 5 to 7 years, or even before then, if it's relevant, on building and sustaining community, and maybe compare that to, or put that in context of how things have looked this year and trying to still build and sustain communities.
Yeah. And like when you talk about that right now, like the first thing that comes up in my mind right now is like how, that experience of like, well, for me, I have this experience sometimes of like when maybe I'm thinking about a person that I'm having a conflict with,
Mm-hmm.
and that person is always like 10 times worse in my mind than what they are in real life.
Mm-hmm.
It's like sometimes I'll be having a conflict with somebody in my mind, and I'll be having a conversation with somebody in my mind, and and I'm defensive and is ugly. And then, I get around the actual whole person, and the actual whole person is like so much more than whatever this straw puppet was I set up in my mind, right?
Mm.
It's like, it's difficult, but sometimes when that conversation becomes a real life conversation between two people, you learn, how much was limited to what your impression of this other person was,
Mm.
and how much, goes into being a living, breathing whole person that's sitting across from you having a conversation.
Mm.
And I think about that a lot right now, just because so much more interaction in my life, at least, happens online now than it did in person before. And what I see, especially on like social media, is that it's so much easier to talk to that person that's in your head
Mm-hmm.
than it is to talk to like this real flesh and blood living human being.
Mm.
And to me, it's like that is the greatest threat and the greatest loss right now in where we are in like relating as a community, relating in community terms. What I've learned in my work is that, I mean, because we're one of the churches that we're not going to meet again until there's a vaccine. Like we're not having in-person services, like we're not doing any of it until there's a vaccine. Oregon upped the religious gathering limits to 25% capacity or 100 people, whichever is less, which seems like wild to me. I mean, wild. I can't imagine. But there are people who are doing that.
Mm-hmm.
We're not meeting until there's a vaccine. And what I've learned is that I had the advantage of seeing these people once a week all together. And when you see a group of people all together, it's like you can tell like who needs some attention, like
Mm.
who needs, what somebody means when they're saying something a certain way. If you haven't seen somebody in a while,
Yeah.
you know, um, and all those things are just so much harder to do and to facilitate without that embodied presence. And so, some of the, so I think like one of the things I've tried to remember again is just like going back to this place of not of what do I not know? You
Mm.
know, like if I see somebody in a digital presentation say that is irritating me, like what do I not know about what's going on with them right now? Like what do I not know about how they were raised, or like what kind of day they're having, or like, you know, there's just so much that's missing from the whole human person that can sit across from you. So like in facilitating community, I mean, in the past, it's been about how do we find spaces where we can really gather and really, you know, be honest about these things. Um, Online, it's more difficult. You know, I've been trying to facilitate these Zoom groups during the week where people just drop in, and we basically just have like a check-in. We take a look at the readings that are coming up for the service on Sunday, and like we'll reflect on them together. But it's really like it's been a great way to just have real conversations and to like talk like we're doing now, because it can get the community can unravel very fast online.
Mm. Yeah. Do you, how do I want to ask? Gosh, there's so much to ask in that. What wants to come out first is, do you feel like your community has gotten smaller,
Mm.
or do you feel like you're kind of, I don't want to say losing people, but
Mhm.
that a significant number of people are finding it harder
Mhm.
to,
Oh yeah.
because I mean, I think of someone like my father, Sunday mornings, I know that I can't call him. Even if I forget that it's Sunday morning, I call, I know he's not going to pick up because he's at church. It's
Mhm.
just always been the case, whether it's he or my grandma. Same thing with Wednesdays, same thing with my sister. She'll be with my grandma at church. Like, this is regularity. It's just beautiful.
Mhm.
But, now with all things COVID, they've each had to figure out, doing things online via Zoom or call-ins or whatever. And so, even something, my grandmother, she had a procedure, and so she couldn't speak, and so my sister was calling in for her, and she had to tell our grandmother, like, no, don't speak in the service, or don't even participate, because you can't. So it's like, we can't really know what is going to be keeping people from, attending, whether it's, the not feeling the in-person stuff, or whether it's like more sicknesses, and then they can't reach out, and you won't know because you don't hear the person coughing in service, or just all these different things. So do you see that those lower numbers, or
Mhm.
less?
Yeah, and I'll start with what I've been thinking about in my own life is I practice yoga, and I had been going to a yoga class twice a week with a teacher who was just like the best teacher I've ever had in my life. Who, like, when I started going to his class, it was like his instructions would be like he would give instructions in such a way where you would make one small little move in your pose, and you would like all of a sudden feel like, oh, like a meat hook or something, like, oh, the whole thing hangs and
There
it's
it
different
is.
now, right?
Yeah.
So and so his so as a teacher in my life and as a practice in my life, it was really important before COVID. And then when those classes went on Zoom, I struggled. And then we got to a point early, and I gave up early. True confessions. I gave up my yoga practice. It was like the first thing to die. I'm sorry to say.
It's okay.
Because we got to a point in the class where it was like, okay, everybody else turn off your cameras, so that we can save on the bandwidth, through
Mm.
instruction. And when I turned that camera off, and the first minute that I was all the way down on the mat, I didn't get back up again, Joy. I just like, I was like, if nobody's watching me, what's the point? Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
you know what I mean? And so I think about that, and I'm not proud of that. I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
It's the way that I am.
Your mat's
Um,
waiting.
it's but I think about that all the time, because
Mm.
for me, I think about my participation in my yoga class as like oh, maybe this is what it's like for somebody in my congregation, coming to me. And so I know there are people, in that class that are probably very faithful to it and are still doing it and have kept their practice strong
Mm-hmm.
and are probably feeling a lot better about certain parts of their body and flexibility than I am right now. And
Uh-huh.
and for me, that was just like one of the things that fell away for right now, and that I can imagine springing back up to life, in a new way when this changes again.
Yeah.
So I try to think about that, about the people in my community. I think about, because there are people who, there's a very like consistent core of people who participate in new ways and in the ways that we've developed to participate now. And I have one-on-one conversations with people who, do not feel as connected and who have found other ways in their life to um to 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 live what we were doing together as community, as individuals. Like in my life, like it has been 9 months since I have stepped on a mat.
Mm.
But when I'm in the world, when I'm walking or when I like have to stretch, like I stretch my body in a way that I wouldn't know how to move it if I hadn't been
Mm.
taught, you know? So I may not be on the mat right now in my yoga practice, but like it has still formed the way that I use my body in the world. And it
Mm.
still just like, and I'm much more likely to like free form, like I'll just be like, oh, I need to stretch this out, and
Yeah.
do what I need to do in the moment or want to do in the moment.
Yeah.
So I like to think of people that I'm not seeing right now as being able to live what they've learned and what they have grown and been formed in our
Mm-hmm.
tradition, that they're able to live it in their own way in the world now. I mean, I would
Mm-hmm.
love to see them someday again, but I also just trust that if we've been doing what we're doing right, then they're able to function in the world without us too.
Yeah. That sounds very, very parental and uh, comforting and guiding and
They can still send a check if any of them are listening right now. Because you're still reaping the benefits in your life, that peace you're feeling right now. So don't
yeah.
forget us. Don't forget us, St. Michael's.
um, oh my gosh, that's all the formal questions that I have for you. Is there anything that we did not cover, or just anything in general that you would like to say or share with whoever might be listening or watching?
Who might be listening or watching? Oh, I don't know. Those were such great questions. Um, I love talking about this stuff, and I love talking about it with you. And it's like it helps me. I'm not usually thinking about these things in this way until I think about it out
Mm.
loud. So the questions help me think about it better. What do I want? I think that one of the big lessons of my life right now is that I'm somebody. You talked a little bit about the things that you've learned as you've gotten older. I think that the biggest thing that I've had to learn is that, or outgrow, is have had this idea in my head of like, if I'm going to be a spiritual person, then I need to like practice this thing. Like when I am spiritually developed, I will have these practices in my life,
Mm.
you know, like I'll be meditating for an hour in the morning and an hour before bed,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be saying all my prayers. I'll be remembering everybody on my prayer list. My body will be right and nourished
Mm.
like a temple. It's like I have this image in my head of like, oh, like, you better be consistent. If you're gonna take on a practice, then you better do it. And I
Yes.
have, and I don't know where that idea has come from in my life, other than the fact that like my actual life is the exact opposite of that. Which is to say that in my life, practices come and go like weeds. It's like or like mushrooms or something else that is like the structure's there underground and it springs up when it's necessary and it falls away when it's not useful anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've had to give myself permission to take on new things or to let go of things that aren't serving me anymore in my practice. Um, I think there's a role for discipline and for saying, okay, I really do need to do this thing for this amount of time because this is the kind of growth that I'm looking for, or this is the kind of need that I have. And at the same time, as we live and grow, you know, we outgrow some of the traditions that we were raised with, some of the practices that we were raised with. If they're really doing the work in us and forming us into new people, then, you know, we need new practices. We need new ways of growing. So that's okay. That's okay. I think the kind of like the negative result of putting so many practices, so many community practices or rituals or whatever on this pedestal of saying like this is what God gave us and told us to do until the end of time, is it's like, well, no, you know, like we made that up in response to what we were getting from the universe, from God. And the time comes to grow and change with that. If it's doing the work in us, then we're going to be different new people. We're going to need practices to keep growing, and that's part of it.
That's okay, and
that's my word of knowledge for the world today, Joy.
I love it. I love you. I
love you too.
Really appreciate this time that you have shared with me and have shared with the world.
Okay. I'm looking forward to sharing this with my circle of people, and I think a lot of them are going to appreciate what you're doing and, you know, conversing about.
Good. I can only hope. Goodness gracious. I can't thank you enough, James. It's really been a pleasure. And yeah, we've ending just a little soon, and that's great. I hope it's not another however many years it's been.
No, that's great. I really, you know, I see stuff from you, you know, it pops up every once in a while, and I'm just always so happy. Like I've followed your journey with dance, and you know, I love who you are in the world, and who you keep being and are becoming, and that's great.
Appreciate it.
Keep the light shining.
And you as well.
Yes.